Do science and religion have the same goal? A new collection of essays by Carl Sagan explores his passion for the search. All I have to say are 3 words, and you'll know who I'm talking about. Billions and billions. Yes, that's Carl Sagan. And although he died 10 years ago, in many ways, this remarkable astronomer is still with us. His latest incarnation, you could say, comes in the form of a book, The Varieties of Scientific Experience, a personal view of the search for God. It is edited by his widow, Druyan, who collaborated closely with her husband. Druyan is an author in her own right and a board member of the Planetary Society, which was founded by her late husband, Carl Sagan. You've had an amazing life, having been so close to Carl Sagan. And now you've taken his lecture series and turned it into a book called The Varieties of Scientific Experience, but it's really a very spiritual book, no?
It really is, and it's called that because, of course, William James wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience in 1900, based on his own Gifford lectures. And these are Carl's 1985 Gifford lectures, and so I thought it was a way to, sort of doff the hat to the great tradition of the Gifford lectures and William James, but also to say that science is a way to have a spiritual experience that's foreclosed to us in other ways.
Now, of course, we think of him as this preeminent scientist and communicator, and we often think, well, scientists can't believe in God, but did Carl Sagan believe in God?
Carl was a scientist through and through, so he didn't believe in God. He didn't believe anything for which he couldn't point to solid evidence. And so in the absence of direct evidence, he withheld his judgment, but that didn't keep him from being one of the most spiritual people I've ever known.
So there's a distinction between believing in God and being spiritual and having a spiritual life.
Yes, you can have a spiritual life and be filled with questions and be engaged in the kind of sacred search that science really is without telling yourself that you know the answers. I think there's a form of humility in being honest and saying, I don't know, but being open to what could be.
Now, there's so many provocative chapters in this, but one of them is The Retreat from Copernicus, a modern loss of nerve. What does that mean?
Well, of course, it was Copernicus who displaced us from the center of the solar system, and the revelations of science ever since have further displaced us from any notion that the universe was made for us. And so the loss of nerve comes when you see this kind of resurgence of the need to be central, the need to believe that the universe was created for us, which comes out of things like intelligent design. And Carl in 1985 is talking about intelligent design, gives the very best argument that a proponent of intelligent design might give, and then proceeds to really tear it apart. And the loss of nerve is that it was very courageous of us to accept that we're not the center of the universe. That is what happens when you grow up. When you're a little baby, you have to be the center. And when you become an adult, you realize that you're not a center, but you're a part of the great fabric of life. And so what we've been seeing lately since Carl's death in the last 10 years is a further retreat from that, a retreat into some old ideas that are comforting but are not borne out by the evidence.
So in other words, it takes guts to admit that we aren't the center of the universe, that we might be floating out there without
on a pale blue dot.
No guardrails.
No guardrails.
But
free falling.
Free falling.
Yeah.
And so when we retreat to the fact that we're the center, that means we've got scared and we're going backwards.
I think it's a mark of insecurity. Just like anyone who would be willing to hurt another person in the name of God. If you really believe in God, God doesn't need your help in inflicting pain on another human being or anyone else. And so it's a mark of insecurity. And I feel that, in a way, what we're seeing, this spasm of fundamentalism that afflicts us, is in part, a retreat, a loss of nerve.
Carl was very involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence in SETI and so forth. Where does that stand? Have we made progress, or what's his view on that?
Well, when Carl started out with his colleagues, Frank Drake and Philip Morrison, great scientists and pioneers, really, it was very courageous of them to even take a scientific approach to this question, because it was considered beneath the dignity of science for science to be engaged in something so interesting and so full of passion. Now, we haven't made any progress in the sense that we haven't found any evidence for extraterrestrial life, but since these men started out, astrobiology has become a huge field in science, and a reputable one.
Astrobiology.
Yes, it's a whole new science, and you can say that these men began this science, and great contribution it is. So just last week, we dedicated the Carl Sagan Center at the SETI Institute in California to, which is 50 full-time research scientists working on this question. So the answer is we don't know much more than we knew then, but we're asking better questions, I think.
We have a lot more smart people working on it
Yes,
than
and
ever
a lot
before.
more people who are working on it, exactly.
There are many people these days who are seeing a convergence, a kind of intersection that is happening between science and religion, whether it be, for example, the impact of prayer on healing or a variety of things. Would Carl Sagan be encouraged and enthused, and would he believe that, the convergence?
I wouldn't speak for Carl because he was such a genius, and I wouldn't presume to say what
You're
he
not
would
a
have
genius?
said. Well, I'm in awe of his greatness, really. But the thing is that science and religion were once one. It wasn't until the modern scientific revolution, which was led by a group of very religious people, all of them, Copernicus and Newton, Kepler, they were all wanting to read the mind of God. They chose science as the most effective way to do so. So for Carl, I think it was the same way. I mean, he was a student of religion. He was fascinated by it. But for him, the best way to worship nature was to do science.
Now, Carl was the ultimate questioner himself, so it's only right that the final chapter should be Q&A, and some of the questions he answered from the people at the lectures. You were there. What was it like?
It was wonderful because there are so many people who didn't share Carl's orientation or point of view. And some of these question and answer sessions with an individual go on for pages and pages as the two minds working together try to get to an answer. And I think it's exemplary of the best of Carl Sagan because there's a respect, a tenderness, an understanding, a compassion that you can feel even just reading it on the page, that he felt towards all of his fellow searchers. And instead of the kind of, I'm smart and you're stupid, it was really, there's a wonderful kind of, sort of swimming through a cave to finally get to an answer. And I found that was really great. It was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Well, Druyan, thank you so much for bringing us the book and keeping Carl alive in many ways for us all these years.
It was my pleasure, Val. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, the name of the book is The Varieties of Scientific Experience, edited by Carl Sagan's widow, Druyan.